This is Tim.
I'm Mulele.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim with Mulele in Tokyo. How are you doing?
All right. You?
Yeah, hanging in there. And we've got more comics to talk about this time. First one is called Radio Silence. This is a webcomic by Vanessa Stefaniuk. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Stefaniuk. Her about page says she's from Canada, but this comic is clearly set in the UK. All British characters. And she started this in 2015. And Radio Silence is the name of the band in the comic of the same title. And we watched them at the beginning. There's kind of a prologue. Well, it's called a prologue. It's not kind of a prologue. Where the band gets together. And then after that, we're watching them as they're touring and this and that. And I thought it was interesting because, at least as far as I read pretty far into chapter 1. Mm-hmm. There isn't really a plot. I mean, it's just kind of, well, like normal life would presumably progress if you were in a band and you were getting to know the other people in the band, and you were a young person who was still trying to kind of figure things out about yourself and about getting along with other people and all that kind of thing. But yeah, reading that prologue especially, I felt like, well, where's the story? And I was trying to figure out if the lack of a plot was a feature or a bug. But I finally decided that Vanessa was doing what she was doing well enough that it was fine the way it is, I think. The art is good, and the story or the proceedings of the comic are, I think, engaging enough. And she seems to be building an audience with it. So, yeah, I thought it was fairly entertaining. Maybe meant for a younger audience than us two old guys, but yeah, kind of a YA flavor to it. What did you think of it?
Well, it was a little too saccharine for me, to be honest. The lack of story is what I immediately felt was a problem, but kind of going through, I got to about page 44 in chapter 1, which is pretty good considering that the prologue is 17 pages. I kind of began to feel that, yeah, the lack of plot isn't really a problem because, yeah, the characters are somewhat engaging. Mm-hmm. And but there's a very serious lack of tension in anything that happens in the comic up till this point. Maybe later in the story there's something that builds up towards that, but for the first I don't know, I guess it would be for the first 60 pages or so.
Yeah, there's not really any conflict.
Yeah, well, there's no tension of any sort, and the characters' problems are all kind of their own problems. There's no one who really causes a problem for anyone else, or if there is a problem that someone causes, it's so minor, like being late to the bus, that it's a little bit of a non-issue. Mm-hmm. There's no hardship that they're fighting against, and they seem to kind of hop, skip, and jump through their career. Um, and every member of the band kind of showed up and were great and immediately said yes to whatever situation. And then suddenly they had a manager who just showed up. And so, there was nothing to getting the band together. They just kind of formed. And then everything just kind of went perfectly. And the artwork, I should say, is quite beautiful. I've got no issues with the artwork. And I actually highly respect and admire full color comics, full color web comics, because just me doing black and white web comics is apparently more than I can handle. But the story seems to kind of just meander. It doesn't ebb and flow because they're not really going to anything or going away from anything. It just kind of runs in a circle, and whether it runs in a circle over here or over there, it doesn't really matter.
I mean, as the story of a band, I can imagine how there could be more tension to it, like something goes wrong, fighting within the band, or the manager dumps them, or they sign with a record company and they get screwed, or those kind of bands face that kind of crap all the time. But it is proceeding a little bit too much like how you would dream that being in a band would go.
Even when one of the guys says, I think he said he bought the bus.
He inherited money from his mom, and so he bought the bus so that they wouldn't have to tour in that cramped van anymore. But I did also feel like that was a little too perfect.
Well, it's a bit of a lost opportunity, because there would have been a lot of tension there had he used the last of the inheritance to finance this thing that may or may not pay out. Instead, it's like, I wanted to buy the bus, so I bought the bus. So I wasn't going to deal with your pee bottles in the cramped van anymore. And it's like, man, now you're touring like you're Guns N' Roses or some shit. And, it's just, it's too easy. It's a lost opportunity. There is absolutely no conflict. And even though it kind of seems like it's supposed to be a feel-good comic, and it does have a lot of that, you can still have a feel-good comic with tension or with some sort of struggle that the characters have to go through. In fact, when the characters win, it's sweet. Here, they're not challenged by anything except their own emotions. And that seems to me to be a weakness of the writing. The through line of the comic is that they're a band and they're doing band things, but there's no our goal is here, or this is we're doing a cross country tour. We're starting here and we're getting there, and these are all the things that happened. Consider, for example, the Blues Brothers, because of course I want to take it to movies. But the Blues Brothers were trying to get the band back together. That was the first part of the story, and the second part was leading up to this one big concert. And they played the giant concert. They got the money, and then they could fulfill the plot device of saving what was it, an orphanage where they grew up. I don't remember exactly, but it was something along those lines. Even if it meant they had to go to jail to do that. And at the end, they're in jail and they make another band and they play Jailhouse Rock. End of movie. But there's something very, very exciting and thrilling about all of the things that happened in that. And there was great music to boot. And there was a through line, however simple it was. We got to get the band back together to make some money to save the orphanage. And at the end, they do that.
Mm-hmm.
Blues Brothers 2000 is a whole other mess. I don't want to comment so much, but for this comic, it needs some sort of through line like that, some sort of plot device to kind of push it forward more than just Shy is feeling a little bit blue about something. I don't know, his sexuality, his arrangement in the tour bus or group dynamics. I mean, it's a little bit light.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of look at this comic and I think, yeah, there's a lot of good here, but that one thing would kind of keep me from reading too much more. Although, we say 30 pages and more, we'll read more if we like it. But, I got 60 pages in, and
yeah, I got about the same. I say I'm on page 41 of chapter 1.
Yeah, I'm on page 44. But I mean, this conversation that Shy is having with the other guy about what, I'm not entirely sure. He just seems to be a whiny bitch, but it just seemed to kind of go on a little bit too long. And if you're waiting, what is it, about half a week to a week between pages, and it there's like a 4 or 5 page conversation there, and it's like, wait a minute, we've been looking at this conversation for 2 weeks now. Get to the thing. But the problem is, in this comic, there is no thing to get to.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, again, there is nothing to drive it forward.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in my mind a bit of a fatal flaw.
Yeah, I can see how it could be enjoyable, but at the same time, yeah, I think to get a larger audience, it would be better to have the band hit some real career roadblocks, and to watch them figure out how to overcome the roadblocks.
Yeah, not to step on your podcasting toes here, but you could say that Batman 66 was a feel good show, and there was lots of tension in that. There was dramatic tension. There was the announcer's voice had tension just dripping from it.
Mm-hmm.
There were cliffhangers. There was always a villain that they had to beat, but no one ever died. It was exciting. It was fun. It was thrilling. And at the end, it didn't matter if there was a cliffhanger or not. Will Batman survive? Of course he will. It's Batman. He'll just, bebop jazz his way out of the giant machine, which punctures holes into the paper that they're tied to, so it'll actually puncture around them. Or at least I remember some sort of weird episode like that.
I think it was the mattress is maybe what you're thinking of with the Sandman. Anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, it's there's tension there,
mm-hmm.
but it's ultimately feel good at the end. And, even to this day, old men are making podcasts about it. So
who are those people?
But I mean, it still enjoys a lot of love because there was something there that was feel good, but also had some thrills or some tension or something. And so this one could really, really benefit from that, to just kind of push it into something really, really interesting.
Okay, and then we also have the first 2 issues of 1000 Nightmares.
First 2, man. I read 1.
Okay, well, the 1 is about almost 30 pages, so I did read both of them. But okay. These are sort of anthology books, but all the stories are written by the same guy, Bill Richardson, with various artists on the individual stories. And this is all, as the name suggests, this is all horror stuff. And I'm not much of a horror guy, but I thought most of these were pretty well done. Some of it gets kind of supernatural. Some of it is very much based in real life. I particularly liked the story in issue 1 called Heroes, which is about, basically real life horror, World War I. And it's done as these kind of collage pages of photos from that time and newspaper pages and just a handwritten text going through it. It looks like a scrapbook, basically.
Yeah, I kind of like the format of that. I thought it was actually kind of clever.
But yeah, I also think it's what's the word I want? I mean, I think it's useful to see sort of real life horror, and I think it makes it somewhat more effective to think about it because there's nothing supernatural about this. There's pretty much really nothing fictional about it. I don't know if the actual people mentioned in it are real or not, but certainly this kind of thing happened in World War I and probably the World War II as well. But we don't really we tend to think of these wars in maybe somewhat more sterilized terms, because we just see the newsreel footage or whatever, and the rulers who were in charge of the various countries and the generals and whatever, but we don't see the horrific injuries that happened to a lot of people, and the individual lives that were affected, both the people who were in the war and their loved ones back home. So how what did you think of this, the book overall?
The Oracle,
the first story.
Yeah, the first story, the splash page, I understand from the behind the curtain segment, is the first was an image that was made without a story, and then the story flowed from that image. And my first feeling was, man, it must take him forever to brush his teeth.
Yeah, it's this face. Well, it's a person whose head is just covered with mouths everywhere. It has a nose, but there are no eyes or ears. It's just all mouths.
Yeah, and it is kind of shocking and horrific in its concept. But as the story goes on, these guys are talking about this Oracle and whether the Oracle is great or bullshit. Well, it just as I was getting interested in the implications of the society that is built upon this Oracle's word, it suddenly shifts gears and we come to some sort of conclusion, shocking conclusion. And I don't want to give it away, but the conclusion was not as shocking as I kind of wanted. And I think that the story could have been a bit longer. It could have had a little bit more. And the ending kind of just cuts to the chase a little bit too quickly.
And given the sort of themes that were being drawn on in the earlier parts of that story, the end just kind of a straight up horror thing, and it didn't really need any of that. And I thought it could have done something more with the themes it was talking about earlier.
Yeah, so the setup it kind of feels like it could lend itself to some sort of Brazil type thing, or some sort of conspiracy, or even like, hey, there's a dark secret that somebody knows, and he gets swept up in it, and at the end he finds out what the dark secret is.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that would have worked a little bit better, but it would have required many more pages. And I think that's not the point of this anthology, is to keep everything very, very brief. But I think this one had potential to go a lot further than it did, and I think was kind of kneecapped by its brevity. The second one, Hard Times, this kind of story, it's about this family whose father has died and the crops went bad, and
winter comes on, and
it's very brutal, and
everybody's starving to death, and
let's just cut to the chase here. It kind of goes a cannibalistic route, but the
kind of very much so.
They hinted at it a little bit.
A little bit.
The kid soup one was pretty rough, but the story of people starving and then resorting to cannibalism to kind of make it through, so this to help the strong make it through the winter. That happens everywhere, and that is what people do. Mm-hmm. Less a horror story and more just a point of history. Again, in the behind the curtain section, he talks about how, back in those days, when you're doing subsistence farming, you were one crop away from dying, and this shit was brutal. And I was kind of thinking that this shit's brutal now, and farming in some areas has been outlawed in the United States. I'm talking specifically about these people who forget which part of the states they're in, but they decided to make a vegetable garden on their own property, and there was a city ordinance that was put in effect, which meant that they couldn't farm there. Now, I don't know if they were in some sort of like cul-de-sac type neighborhood and suddenly were growing vegetables on their front lawn, but the fact that you own the property and cannot grow what you want to grow there is kind of wrong in my mind. That, coupled with the idea that Trump has, I think we were talking about this last time, maybe it wasn't Trump, but in Florida, I like to blame Trump for everything. He's the big bad guy. Even though you can't have Trump without Obama. Anyway, in Florida, you can't do solar panels, or in some parts of Florida, as I understood it. We kind of debated this back and forth, but I'm still of the mind that it's been outlawed. So, in that sense, you can't pull yourself off of the system. You can't live your life the way you want. You have to be a part of a bigger regime. And even under that bigger regime, you get squashed. When you look at inner city life, that shit's brutal. And so I look at this story and I think, well, this isn't so different than what happens now. So I kind of didn't feel it was a horror thing as much as it was just a brutal reality that continues today. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Nevermore, the sequel to The Raven, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of Edgar Allan Poe. And really don't care for poetry, so I passed. Do you have any comment?
I didn't really read those 2 pages. I just went straight to the comics.
Yeah, man, I'm more about the comics than just the straight, poetry. So It seems that Bill Richardson is very passionate about it, but I'm just absolutely not interested. So
Mm-hmm.
those 2 pages, nope. Heroes we already talked about, and last one, The Meaning of Life.
Mm-hmm.
It's cute, but it's really nothing.
Yeah, it's
Um,
some vultures talking about the meaning of life, basically,
yeah,
before they surprise, surprise, chow down on a bunch of bodies that happen to be lying nearby from, I don't know, like, must be someplace where some government is killing some ethnic group or something. There's a pit full of
yeah.
bodies.
Um, but I mean, to be honest, there is no shocking truth. There is no revelation so brutal and so honest that I found any of this book horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of a graphic depiction of violence or death that I found a little bit ugh.
Yeah.
His eyeball. What? um, and so, I mean, for the comic that it is, it's okay. But I'm reminded of DC did a horror anthology a couple of years ago, maybe about 10, 15 years ago. Um, and I remember reading a couple of issues of that. Maybe it was 20 years ago. I'm getting old. I'm losing track of time. But uh, there was a story about this guy who could, um, for whatever reason, he just on one morning woke up and he could smell everything a little bit more acutely. But I mean, as the story went on, it's only 8 pages, but as the story went on, his sense of smell became stronger and stronger, and until it drove him insane because he was like looking for the smell, and it was the smell of his own body that he couldn't stand.
Hmm.
And there's some sort of body horror, psychological horror in that they really kind of played with. Of course, this was a comedy, a horror comedy.
Hmm.
And so he's like ripping out his fingernails. He's like trying to peel off his own skin because his skin stinks. And as he's going insane and they're taking him away, he's shouting at his boss, telling him to get his colon checked because he thinks he has cancer. And just like, man, from across the room, he could smell that. And it was just so, it was, number one, it was unsettling because, yeah, everybody smells. But the idea that he could smell that part of his body so clearly, he could smell the disease inside of his asshole. That was horrifying to me. And that stuck with me for 20 years. So that level of, and actually in that, the most gruesome thing of that story was the fingernail pulling. Here, there's a lot more graphic stuff. Lots of dead bodies and body parts and all these things, but there is no idea here that will unsettle me and stick with me. So horror, yeah, I guess it kind of fits the genre, but it's more like a splatter flick than anything truly disturbing.
The first story and the second issue I want to talk about a little bit. It doesn't seem to have a title. I can't find a title on it anywhere. I find the story a little confusing because it kind of keeps changing direction. It opens with a splash page of a priest who is apparently about to abuse an altar boy. He's saying, "Hold still, Arroya. This is God's will for you," and he's undoing his own belt.
Mm-hmm.
But the rest of the story is not about that. It's in perhaps Iraq during the Iraq War, and a Muslim man is setting a bomb on a kid and sending him in to be a suicide bomber. And it seems that the man, maybe the father of the boy, he has the idea that the boy is gay, and he thinks that's terrible, and so he can redeem himself by being a suicide bomber, going in amongst the American military and blowing himself up.
Mm.
So the boy goes in and he's talking with the soldiers, but he feels really bad about the idea of setting off his bomb there, and he's eventually sitting alone with one soldier, and it seems that the soldier is also gay. And they're sort of talking about that, and then the boy reveals that he has a bomb strapped to him, but he's not going to set it off. But his father is watching him in binoculars, and it turns out his dad has a remote control, and he blows both of them up.
Yeah.
And then the last, and pretty graphically too, their guts coming out. Then on the last page, it kind of, I don't know. I mean, I get the point here, and I don't know. It just felt like the story went in a completely different direction than I was expecting it to. So it's a full page, and it's God, and we know this because up in the upper left-hand corner, there's a box that just says God in it. But I think I could have figured that out anyway. And God is saying, yes, 2 more queers sent to hell. And then at the bottom of the page it says, how can anyone think that this is the way God feels? And I see his point, but that page feels sort of like it's its own thing. I mean, you almost didn't need the rest of the story. You could have maybe just had like a panel. You could have had maybe the bomb going off and then the God thing. But I mean, I felt like the story had other aspects to it that sort of didn't pay off. I don't know. I just felt like the story was sort of hadn't quite made up its mind what it wanted to be, and I didn't really get what the splash page with the priest was about either, since mostly this is about Muslims and the military and gays.
I downloaded the comic while you were talking and looked it over. The boy on the splash page is in fact the soldier who the boy talks to later.
Oh, okay.
You can see among the flying guts and bomb blast body parts, you can see his name tag.
Okay, yeah, I do remember seeing the name Arroyo in there someplace else. Yeah, it's on. Yeah, but yeah, I guess that link was unclear because it just suddenly kind of changed from that. We had one panel of that, and then suddenly we're in Iraq.
Well, I think the point here is just kind of religious extremism.
Mm-hmm.
Is religious extremism regardless of the religion, and the idea that God wills homosexual people to die is kind of a ridiculous idea.
Mm-hmm.
I think the telling of the story is really ham-fisted, especially with that page at the end. Mm-hmm. God giving a yay, jumping out of his golden throne. Yeah, but
and if you get rid of that caption at the end, you end up with a completely different story.
Well, I mean, it begins to rely on you understanding that it's being facetious, but somebody could take the totally opposite message from it if they missed the caption or if they wanted to take everything literally. True, true. But yeah, it maybe the writer needs to kind of examine a few things before he sends this off to the artist, because it seems a little bit underdeveloped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too.
How about the other stories?
Well, let's see. The other stories. Well, the next story is called STD, and this guy has gotten an STD that's made his crotch just kind of turn into it looks like a terrarium or something. It's just this kind of tentacles and stuff reaching out in all directions. And so he goes out in search of the woman that he got it from, and it turns out that she's apparently, before she had sex with him, she was impregnated by somebody else who put this kind of monster in her, who, just as the guy arrives, she sort of explodes and this monster comes out and eats him. End of story.
Okay. Actually, sorry, just on the second page,
Mm-hmm.
there's an image of the doctor seeing the guy's crotch with the tentacles,
Mm-hmm.
and the doctor is puking.
Yeah.
And there's the caption: "When you make the doctor throw up, you know you've got it bad."
You know, you've got a problem. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. I like that very much. I also have to say I like the art style.
Yeah, it's black and white with no shades of gray. It's
Yeah,
really stark.
yeah. I kind of like the way it is illustrated. Sometimes a little bit hard to read, but it kind of lies somewhere between Mike Mignola and Frank Miller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and as far as storytelling, I think this one works better than the one before it.
Mm.
It's pretty straightforward. Then he has a story called Chains, which is told. It's somewhat similar to Heroes in the first issue. It's all photos that he's doctored to draw in these chains in white, and his point is how people can feel kind of chained to their situation, chained to other people, and that we're the only ones who can unlock the chains.
Mm.
And yeah, I think it makes sense. It's okay.
Okay.
There's a one pager called London Falling, which is more, I don't know if this is a poem exactly. I didn't read it. Although I noticed the last line was a pun. A ripper runs through it. It seems to be a reference to Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
And then there's a story called A Helping Hand, where a guy trains a dog to be a killer and then encounters a boy who's been beaten by his dad and gives the impression that apparently he's going to take in the boy the same way that he took in the dog. That was how I read it anyway, that maybe he was going to train the boy to be a killer.
Mm.
Although in Behind the Curtain, here it is. Helping Hand is an adaptation of a short story I wrote a long time ago. I've always been fascinated by people who treat animals better than humans. I think that might have had something to do with the inspiration for the story.
Mm. Kind of looking it over simply while you're talking about it. Do you have a favorite story from this, from number 2?
From number 2... I don't think I liked anything as well as I liked Heroes.
Mm-hmm.
But just maybe for the quality of the storytelling, maybe I like STD the best.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, I'm kind of of the same mind. STD and Heroes were both all right.
So I always forget to mention it recently, but I always link to, if I can, I link to the comic, even if it's free or a place to buy it, or if I can't find the comic online, then a Kickstarter page or a Facebook page or something related to the comic so you can get more information. What are you doing on social media lately?
Well, I decided to do Inktober.
Hmm.
I'm doing 2 pictures a day, but then I'm not posting them anywhere. No, I'm not doing anything really. To be honest, my feeling about Twitter is slowly beginning to uh, look like my feeling about Facebook. I mean, it's just kind of not worth it. It's not like I want to end it all completely, but I'm just on it less and less. In fact, I don't think I've been on Twitter today. Haven't been on Facebook today. I mean, nothing.
Hmm.
I would rather. I mean, I I have to admit I am somewhat addicted to YouTube, but I can just watch that like TV and it's cool.
Hmm.
I'm also working on a comic uh, for a client right now, and that's kind of taking up my time.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and I am somewhat in the background, simultaneously writing 2 scripts. So yeah, lots of stuff that I'm doing that I can't really talk about yet, but
Hmm.
I would say for the most part, yeah, you can find me at Mulele Redux on Twitter and on Facebook and on Instagram. But at this point, aside from political retweets or the occasional illustration, not doing much. But if someone sends me a message or asks me a question, I'm there to answer because I do respond to that stuff pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't spend a whole lot of time on any social media. I'm there. I'm at Decon Comics on Twitter. I have 2 other Twitter accounts too that I spend very little time on. On Facebook, I if somebody sends me something, or if there are notifications, then I always look at them right away. But I don't spend a lot of time just kind of messing around on the site looking at stuff.
Hmm.
Facebook, we have a page and a group for Deconstructing Comics. Instagram, as I've mentioned before, there isn't a Deconstructing Comics presence there at all. I've mainly used it for my Machigai English study stuff for a Japanese audience. So
Oh, real quick, one thing that I can talk about that I'm working on. Don't know if I'll actually be able to debut it on time, but I am at least aiming for it. Um, I think I said on the podcast a while ago about getting harassed by a cop.
oh yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, so that Oscar and I are making that comic
Hmm.
uh, together. That we almost put it on hold, but we're kind of back at it, and I'm penciling this weekend. He'll be inking after that, and if we can make it to the printer on time, then we should have some. We should have that story with a kind of information pamphlet about how to deal with cops in Tokyo when they walk up to you and start harassing you for being a foreigner. Um, it actually rights apply to all people evenly. So whether you're a foreigner or a Japanese citizen, you can use the same tactics. Oh, by the way, Japanese cops, do not beat you or shoot you for any reason. So, as the rules state, for them to shoot you, you have to shoot them first. That's a Japanese law. You have a gun, they can draw their gun, but they can't actually fire until you fire first. So nobody's getting shot here, except cops. So I would recommend these tactics for Japanese police, but definitely not for American police. Sure, yeah. Any American living in the States knows this. But anyway, the comic will be available hopefully by Kaigai and Comics Art Tokyo, which will be, I think, November 24th and 25th, something like that.
Yeah, they're back to back again. Well, this year Cat is on the 24th of November and Kaigai is on the 25th.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any way I can go to both of them this year. And last year, remember Kaigai was on Thursday the 23rd, a Japanese holiday, and then Cat was on the 25th. And if I hadn't had an interview set up to do at Cat, I'm not sure I even would have gone, because I kind of got there and I felt like I just did this. I just saw these same people 2 days ago, and there's no reason for me to interview them again. So plus this year I've got more, a lot of other stuff going on, so it kind of remains to be seen if I'll go to either one of them. But
man, if you don't come, who's going to watch my table when I got to go to the bathroom?
Isn't your girlfriend going to be there?
No, she's like, man, I'm sick of your comics nonsense. You can do that alone. It's like, oh, really? But come on, I'm hoping that we can afford kids this way.
Maybe you can share a table with Oscar.
Actually, Oscar's asked me a couple of times, and I think maybe I'll take him up on that at Cat next year. But this year we got separate tables. I don't even know if we'll be in the same area. But yeah, that might be a better way, because this shit's getting expensive, and I don't really want to use such a large space for my couple of comics.
Okay, so if you would like us to critique your comic, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and we'll read at least 30 pages of it and talk about it on the show. So, till next time, this is Tim.
I'm Mulele.
And thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics. I seem to have been asleep when we recorded this. Listening to it now, it's clear that the Batman episode Mulele was referring to wasn't Sandman, it was Chandel. Sheesh, some Batman podcaster I am. Also, I was talking about linking to the comics we talk about, but I didn't say link from where. The links are in the show notes at deconstructingcomics.com, and depending on your podcast app, you might see the links in your app as well. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, Kumar and Dana discuss the recent Image series Infidel. Then in 2 weeks, Mulele and I will be back to discuss another comic and an announcement about Deconstructing Comics and Critiquing Comics. See you then.